Hello, my name is Mark Kashman. I am a senior product manager at Microsoft and want to take a moment to share all the places that you can create a list inside Microsoft 365 through the desktop, whether you're using apps like SharePoint or Teams, or if you're on your mobile device, iOS or Android. There's a lot of entry points, and I'm going to enumerate through all of them where you can start your list, where you can start that notion of creating a list. And it's not just in one place. It's really trying to meet you where you're working, when you need to make a list. We want to give you the access to be able to create it. Throughout this video, I'm going to show you a number of ways where you can create a list from. You're going to see starting a list from the Lists home, or what we call the Microsoft Lists app in Microsoft 365, from the Microsoft 365.com experience, what we call the Microsoft 365 app, formerly Office.com. We'll show creating an app from the SharePoint app bar, creating a list from within SharePoint itself, creating a list in Microsoft Teams, creating a list in the Microsoft Lists mobile application. I'll show you iOS today, and the bonus element of creating a Microsoft Lists when using Microsoft 365 connected templates. So where we are going to start to learn of all the different places you can create a list from, we're going to start in the most obvious place, which is the Microsoft Lists homepage, or sometimes referred to as the Microsoft Lists app. And just to orient you where we are, we're signed into Microsoft 365. I'm signed in a demo account here, but you can see I have access to all my different applications, whether I'm reading email in Outlook, working with files in OneDrive, working through all the different things in Teams and SharePoint. You get the point. Where I'm at, though, is the Lists home, or the Lists app in Microsoft 365, and that is where we are going to create our first lists. And sometimes in the future, I'll certainly narrow down so it's a little bit shorter on the actual creation experience, because the intent is once you start creating a list, the experience is very common or similar no matter where you start. To show you, if you go onto the Lists homepage, and at the very top you'll see New List. Click Create New List, and as you would expect, it starts you into the experience of creating from blank, benefiting from a list that you already have, that you've already formatted and done some work around, so you can use the smarts or the formats of that list. You can bring in data from Excel and start the list that way, or use a CSV file, which just means it might be another database application that isn't Excel, but you can save it out to a CSV file. We accept that both for import and export. But then the general notion of creating a list here, we'll just create a new asset manager list. Get a peek ahead, you get a sense of what the different columns are that you're going to use, and that's pretty straightforward. Use the template, give it a name. We'll use this asset manager Contoso, and we'll give it a green and a rocket. And this is where I have a choice, creating a list. Most of the time you have the ability to choose where to save it to. One caveat, and that's actually a valued benefit when we get there. But here I can choose between my list, my personal lists, and I can choose to go into one of the various sites that I work in and co-own or manage. And so let's just say I want to put it in the new retail space. I can show it in the site navigation or not, and you get the point. I have now created a list, and it's going to store it in SharePoint. This happens to be the retail site, and I'm now given in that name for the list, Asset Manager Contoso. That's pretty much it. And of course, now we can do lots of different things with lists, but the value I hope for you of this video is to show you all the different places where you can create a new list. So let's stick with that. Let's start creating a new list from a different location. And to switch a little bit, I'm going to go into what is now currently referred to as the Microsoft 365 app. To get there, you just type in Microsoft365.com. You can also still type in office.com, which is what formerly the name was, office.com. But as we switch over, you'll either get there the way that you know how to today, or over time it'll be the Microsoft365.com or the Microsoft 365 app. Now, the first thing you see here is that there's a presence of what you've been doing with lists. If I look down to the quick access where I can see all the recent things that I've been doing, I can see lists like the one we just created, the Asset Manager Contoso. So I can get to that if I want to. That's a lot of value of Microsoft 365 app is getting to the work that you have most recently done. And you can see some of the other lists here. I can even pivot on other, which at this point means anything in the SharePoint world like lists or pages. And of course, I can pivot and navigate all that I want. But we're here to learn about create. So you see it here in the header. For the first time, if you come to Microsoft365.com for the first time, you're going to get the banner up here that's either going to remind you that Microsoft 365, formerly Office 365 app, but you'll get this create experience. So you can create new, or always you can go into the Create tab. So let's do that. I'll go into the Create tab. It's kind of Templatesville across all the applications. I can create a new Word document, a new Excel workbook, a new form, a quiz. But if you notice here, there's a new content type that you can create from the Microsoft 365 app. And watch what happens when I click it. Jumps me over into the Lists app, which is where we just were. So it's a quick start that jumps me right into that new list experience. Create a new list within lists. So again, we'll do this pretty quick. We'll use the Recruit Tracker, use the template, choose your colors and your icons. And again, I have the choice to put it where I want to. This time we'll put it in Sales and Marketing, click Create, and like that, we have a new list called the Recruit Tracker. This one happens to have a couple of reminder workflow attached to it, so I'm getting prompted to do that. But again, I've created from the Microsoft 365 app, and I'm now dropped into the Sales and Marketing team site within the Microsoft Lists user interface. So that's one way to start from the Microsoft 365 app. I also have loaded up here Microsoft 365 from a consumer perspective. So I'm signed in here, and I am signed in as myself with my old Hotmail account. And I can see here I'm on OneDrive, and I started here just as a FYI. A lot of what we do with where we store lists ultimately on the back end is SharePoint. But because OneDrive, the app, is built on SharePoint, one of the elements that we took advantage of in OneDrive for the lists is that My Site, or the personal site. That's where we're actually storing your lists. And that's mostly in the commercial space, but it's also starting to take hold in the into the consumer space, your personal or your home location. So if I go from OneDrive, you'll see now in that app launcher, even in the commercial space, we still call it Microsoft 365, but I'm signed in with my consumer ID, what we call a Microsoft account. And if I go into all apps, you can see there's lists. And if in fact I click on it, it'll take me to the list instance of me, Mark, signed in with my Hotmail account. And you can see here I have that same access to these lists. I've created a bunch of fun ones. I've pivoted down and I've created views. I've done a whole bunch of stuff so that I can work with my information. In fact, this one's kind of fun. It's all of the things around Batman, characters, poster art. But for me, this is just a consumer list that I track to track information that's important to me. Now, the thing that I can do from here is if I go up to the Microsoft 365 level, I'll also see that here I'm seeing all the different things that we're working on. So at this point in time, where we're at with rollout in the consumer space is we do have lists as one of your apps that you can click to if you're a Microsoft 365 home or personal customer. But ultimately, the value is during this preview, as we start to get into rolling out lists more broadly, currently in preview, you can see that I can access lists. And in fact, if I put this away and go to the Microsoft Lists home, go to click New to click and create a new list in the consumer space through the Microsoft Lists app, you can see that that is the same experience, whether I'm coming at it and starting in Outlook or OneDrive. Ultimately, if I go to lists with my Microsoft account signed in, I get that same experience of creating. Here is the gift ideas template. Use the template gift ideas for Christmas 2023. And I'll do blue and a box and click create. And again, the whole create experience, very fast. Same experience, same template choices, that kind of thing. But again, signed in here with my Microsoft account. So let's switch context again and get into another way that you can create or where you can create from. So we're going to move from the Microsoft 365 app, Microsoft365.com, into SharePoint. So this is the SharePoint start page. If you're in the Microsoft 365 App Launcher and you click on the SharePoint app, you're going to land here. A list of all your frequent sites, following, recent, anything that's been programmed for you distinctly, like the landing down here. So you have sites of all types. And there's really two things that I want to show you in the context of SharePoint. First is the SharePoint app bar. So if you notice here on the left-hand side, no matter what site I go to, whether it's a team site, if I go back to SharePoint, I click into the landing. If you notice on the left here, this app bar follows me wherever I go. So I can see the global navigation, my sites, my news, I can see my files. And coming down here are two things. I can see my lists. So I can see lists that I've been working on most recently or favorited. But from a create experience, I now have the ability from the SharePoint app bar to create a number of different things, including a list. So imagine I'm on a site and I want to create a list. I can do it right from here. Click Create List, and if you notice, it jumps me into that same common create list experience. This time I'm going to do it from an existing list. Let's say I go into the benefits and I want to use the list formatting similar to global country holidays. If I click Next and I do global holidays, not just country, we'll do green, cup of coffee, and this time we'll just put it into this same site or put it into retail and marketing. And then click Create. And from the SharePoint app bar, I've created a new list. I've chosen where I wanted to put it, and life is good. Now, if I go back to SharePoint and I'm on an individual site, either like the landing, or if I go back to SharePoint, something like a sales and marketing, which is a team site, you'll get this notion of the new drop-down menu. Create new list. This time a little bit of the change is I'm in SharePoint, so I want to stay inside a specific SharePoint site, this particular team site. Now I have the same level of access to create, but if you notice I stay within the SharePoint user interface. In this instance I want to create a playlist, and I'm going to go in and get a sense of what this playlist looks like. I'm going to use that for training and keep it in the site navigation and click create. This template now available to me can add some new items, and in fact I need to go into sales and marketing, choose my videos, and like that, from within SharePoint, I've got a new playlist of 4 videos, and I can do whatever I want with those. I can use them outside of SharePoint, use them in SharePoint, but the create experience is, of course, we've updated the create experience in SharePoint, but you absolutely can still create a list in SharePoint. And in fact, to go just one more step further, I'm going to go home, still in that same SharePoint site, and this time I'm going to go into what we call the site contents page. That basically gives me the underbelly of this entire SharePoint site. Here are all the document libraries, all of the lists. And if you start from here and you go into new, you can create a new list and you have that same create experience. So when you're in a site, whether it's a team site, if I go back to SharePoint, I go into that landing page, I can certainly go in and create a new list. And hopefully you see it's the same experience, the same value of being able to create new, and in this case, create a new list. And the fun part about this one, this is the landing. You might have seen this before. This is the landing that we sometimes show in the context of Viva Connections. So this is that same experience of the actual site, the landing, as Viva Connections in Microsoft Teams. So if I create a list and I want to leverage it on this page, I certainly can do that. And especially if I own it, I can create directly from within here. But we'll get to that when we get to the Microsoft Teams experience. So let's move on from creating in SharePoint, whether it's the SharePoint app bar or to create in a SharePoint site when you're in the site itself. A lot of times, people these days, of course, are in Microsoft Teams, and a lot of the value is to stay in Teams, to stay in the flow of work. And so we have a nice lists app in Microsoft Teams that's just like any other tab app with the unique capability that you can create. You don't just bring in existing content, you can do that, but you can also create a new list. So let's see what it's like to create a new list like this one, retail accounts. This is an existing list, but let's step through what it is to create a new list in Teams. So I'm in the retail team on the general channel. So within the channel, I click Add a tab, and there's the Lists app in Teams. A couple clicks to get in to save this as a new tab. And if you notice here, it says Lists, and then I can choose to create a list or add an existing list. Great value both ways, but since we're talking about creating a list, let us do that. You're presented with what should look now familiar, that create list experience with inside the user interface of Teams. So we adopt to how you create a list in Teams, a little different, but certainly no different than your other experiences of creating or using information as tabs in Teams. And this time we're going to use a different template, the travel requests. Get a peek ahead of what that looks like. Use this template, give it a name. We'll just call it travel. And if you notice, here is the word travel, and this list, keep in mind that what you name it here is what it'll rename the tab to. You can always rename the tab to whatever you want. We'll choose a color of red and an icon of travel. We'll just keep it as the airplane. The big difference here when you create a list inside of Teams is it already knows where to put this list. So you don't have to choose from My Lists or multiple team sites. You don't even get the option because it's going to create it in the connected site that's connected to this retail team. And there's a lot of value in doing that because a lot of people don't need to necessarily know where this list gets created. The fact is they're just tracking information and they just want to get that done. So click Create. That list is now getting created in SharePoint, connected as a tab in Teams. You'll see that the name list now says travel, and now this is a list that you can add new information in directly, how you like. We'll just put in new item for the sake of showing you how this works. Put in some basic details, and now I have a new list item in a new list in Teams that I just created in seconds as a tab in Teams. And that's pretty unique in terms of not having to choose where or how, but just getting work done. So this is the Microsoft Lists for iOS app. And you can see after launching it, it'll take you right to the home page. And from here, I am signed in with my commercial account for Microsoft, but we also support consumer. I'll show you that. So create a new list, start with blank, or of course you can choose from a template. I'll give it a name, Mark, and keep this pretty simple, blankness. And like you've seen me do before, I can choose a color, I can choose an icon, and I can choose where I want to save it. I can put this in the intro zone, put it in the site navigation, and then create this list. From my mobile device, I'm now creating the list in SharePoint in that connected site that I'm seeing now, and I have the ability to add a new item. And once I start working with this list, I'll have the access that I need to create lists, to edit them, to share them, all with the access in my palm of my hand. Microsoft List for iOS. There it is. So if we switch context a little bit, you can see from the home page, I can get back to that new list. I can also switch from my commercial account to what I showed you earlier, that consumer account. This is consumer through the iOS device. So this is that same Batman list that I showed you, what it looks like on mobile. So you can see that I have switched context to my personal lists, and I have great access to see the list items, the full list itself. But of course, what are we here for? To see what the create experience is. So I'm creating a new list for my personal uh, information tracking. So these are a couple lists that I've created. This is the create experience, same exact experience you just saw. Now when I click and choose a template, it'll give me a peek ahead. I use this template, give it a name, give it a color, give it an icon. But the real value here is that I'm creating this list in a consumer SharePoint environment. So this is SharePoint on the back end with lists as the front end. The front end here, of course, is the Lists mobile app for iOS, switching between commercial and consumer, adding a new item, basically updating this list. I see some of the template that's already intact with a choice field. I can assign this to myself. This is just my other email account. So there's a lot that you can do to get started and then of course get productive with the different ways that you can choose dates, pickers, and whatnot. We even have the smart syntax that if I choose the wrong date based on the template, then it'll tell you, go and change that. And when I save it down, this is all being updated on the back end, as you would expect. But again, different scenario for work and life and all in balance within iOS so that I can see everything across what I'm doing with my peers at work, with my friends, my family, and I can easily switch between the accounts. Now, the last thing that I want to show you is what is Microsoft 365 connected templates and how does it relate to list creation? It's kind of a bonus because this is something that you might not do quite as often, but it's a lot of work that we're doing to connect a lot of different templates together. List templates inside of a SharePoint template that's connected to a similar scenario template in Teams, all in one click. So let's see how it works. If I go in and create a new team, I'm going to do that within Teams. And here I can select from a template and I can use, let's say, the new experience of creating a connected template, which uses the scenario of managing a project. I'll get a peek ahead of what actually is going to get created. So it's not just a Microsoft Teams team that gets created. You're going to get a number of different things automatically already pre-populated, multiple channels, and 8 apps that are basically showing up as tabs. And if you see here, you've got 2 lists that are going to get created as part of this connected template, manage a project. You're going to get an issue tracker list created and a project tracker list created, amongst all the other things that you see here, which really the value is we're combining a lot of things so that you create once, but you create more of what you need without having to do it all manually, or maybe not even knowing the art of the possible. You didn't know maybe that some of these things existed. So I'm going to click Next. I'll make this a private team. I'll give it a name. We'll just call it Project Mark. And if I wanted to customize and do a number of different things, but for the sake of this demo, I'm going to click Create and show you everything and what it looks like after this new team gets created. So here is Project Mark. We've got a general channel set up for us. Some of the things may still be, getting set up in the background, but if you notice, here's our issue tracker. Here's our project tracker. This is using list templates that are available but called upon through the Microsoft 365 connected template to create the SharePoint site, to create these 2 lists, and then add them automatically as tabs in Teams. So it's really nice to be able to save time, and especially if you're not fluent with all the applications and what they can do for your team with inside Microsoft Teams, it's sort of a cheat way of looking at all the available tab apps and then having them pre-created for you, ready for use so that you can start tracking Project Mark or project whatever you call your projects. Maybe not every project is Project Mark. Now that you've seen all of the places that you can create a list from, with the benefit of then, of course, tracking information throughout Microsoft 365, whether it's individual lists, team lists, lists that are used across the organization. To learn more about Microsoft Lists beyond creating, I've got 3 Microsoft List resources that I wanted to highlight. There's always the Resource Center. If you go to aka.ms/mslists, you're going to find links to pretty much everything that you want to know about lists, blogs, videos, podcasts. Some of the other resources that are listed here are also called out. The other 2 that I wanted to highlight is if you actually are starting to use lists, whether it's creating, editing, sharing, leveraging different views, working on formatting, all of those different things. There's a lot of great help content. Sometimes it's very task oriented. Step 1, step 2, step 3. Sometimes it has videos. A lot of times it just enumerates through how to get something done. I want to create a view. I want to share a list. I want to create a list in Teams. There's a lot of great help content, and to get there at the most parent level, just go to aka.ms/mslists/help. And last, I've also put together a broader notion of learning Microsoft Lists in a workshop. It's a 2-part workshop. It's all online, all on demand, 2 videos, not too long, but you get the real breadth of all the things that you can do with Microsoft Lists in a format meant for training. And it also has materials if you want to be the trainer in your organization or wherever you might want to share how to work with lists. So Go to aka.ms/mslists/workshop, and you'll see all the materials that you need either to consume the training or to use and create the training on your own. I hope that you have learned you can truly make a list from anywhere and let it flow. Let the information tracking begin, and then certainly enable great collaboration, great work management, great issue tracking, great all the things you can think of with lists, your information at your fingertips, and making it much, much more easier and pervasive on where you can create a list. So make a list and let it flow.